All right, they fixed it. You know, it actually boggles my mind that I'm still doing this. I never really set a parameter of how long I was gonna do this, or how many videos I was gonna do. And because of that, I thought it would make it easier for me to keep going. For whatever reason, when I have a goal, sometimes maybe it seems easier to give up. And I'm realizing that it actually just feels easier to give up no matter what. And that push can come from whatever pushes the individual, whatever pushes me. But 7 of these is a big deal to me. If I'm being real, I didn't think I would make it that far. I think I'm used to giving up before something becomes normal. And this is starting to feel a little normal. Now, the push to actually leave the house in order to start filming is the hardest part. Filming it isn't, and editing it sure isn't. But actually just the first step is the hardest. And I think that's a pretty universal feeling for anybody trying to do something creative. Not necessarily even creative, just doing anything. The first step is the hardest, because once you've pushed through that, it's easy to convince yourself that, well, I've already started, I might as well keep going. But with this, as soon as I finish editing for a day, that to me is a goal. It's a goal that I hit, and I have to start starting it all over the next morning. It doesn't feel like I'm continuing a project. But honestly, whatever. I made it out the door today, that's what matters. Tackle it again tomorrow. So yesterday I gave myself a topic to talk about once I was on my walk to see if it went any smoother. Spoiler alert, it won't. Now, the topic wasn't random, I knew what I was gonna talk about, and I didn't necessarily have a full story behind it. I just knew that it was an interesting thing. So yesterday I chose to talk about the late film director, George A. Romero. Now, this one's interesting for me because he was incredibly influential to me at a time when I was learning what was influential to me. When I was younger, maybe high school age. George A. Romero was born February 4th, 1940, and unfortunately passed away from lung cancer this last Sunday, July 16th, 2017. He was 77. He was a film director, best known for grandfathering the modern zombie genre. In 1968, he and his team released the feature-length film Night of the Living Dead, probably one of the most influential horror movies on modern horror cinema to date. And due to some kind of debacle with rights during the release of that film, all copyright ownership ended up being relinquished to the public domain, which probably helped be the key to his success, because it suddenly took a film that was good and entertaining, but maybe not as marketable, and made it instantly accessible in an age before the internet. Anyone could air it on TV, anyone could make copies, play it in the theater for without having to pay a fine. It was easy to get that movie out, and that still stands today. In fact, when I was in junior high, I believe that was the first time I saw Night of the Living Dead. It was one of the first Halloweens that I didn't go out trick-or-treating. May have been the first, may have just been among the first. And I remember the siblings were out, my dad and my stepmom were out, and I was home alone for the first time on Halloween night. And I started flipping through our movie channels, trying to find something that would terrify me, because I think that was around the age when I was seeking out those horrifying experiences in movies. Now, I knew about Night of the Living Dead, but I hadn't seen it up to this point. But boy, do I remember that night. Something clicked in me for the first time that night. When I was younger and wanted to be a filmmaker, people used to ask me, what movie was it that you saw that you remember going, that's what I want to do? And I think my go-to answer, being the age I am, was Jurassic Park. But when I take time to think a little bit more critically about that question, Jurassic Park didn't necessarily make me want to be a filmmaker, because I fell into that world beyond a movie. Jurassic Park made me want movies to be real. I wanted to go to Jurassic Park. I wanted to play with dinosaurs. But Night of the Living Dead was the first time I remember being so viscerally affected by a movie that I recognized it as craft, that I recognized it as something somebody had made, assembled, put together, planned for, in order to make me feel that way. I lost myself in its world, and I felt the dread, and I felt the fear that what was happening on screen was possibly happening in real life.
Welcome to a night of total terror.
And when it was over, that lingered with me for a while. But it was the first time that a movie gave me that type of fright. And once that had sunk in, I stopped to think about the fact that someone had to make that. Someone's ideas created that emotion in me, that visceral fear.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
And this being maybe mid-life cycle of DVDs, and I count the death of DVD as the Blu-ray, not the fact that DVDs are still being sold today. But this being mid-life cycle of the DVD, that movie was readily available. I mean, you could find it in dollar bins. Again, because it was in the public domain. So I tracked myself down a copy, and I watched it over and over and over. And it was one of the first movies that I remember trying to create a shot list for, trying to break down a scene and see what about it actually scared people. What about the filmmaking, the techniques, the craft of it created this reaction from me? Because it's one thing if a movie has scary imagery or things that frighten you there in the moment, but it's a completely other thing when you lose yourself to the world of a movie. And during that experience, you feel like whatever you're seeing on screen and whatever it's making you feel is going to continue long past the credits once you walk out that door. And that's a rare experience. One of the few other films I remember actually giving me a similar feeling, and judge me all you want for it, was, God damn it.
God f***ing damn it!
One of the few other films that actually gave me that experience, and judge me all you want for it, was Steven Spielberg's remake of War of the Worlds. I saw that movie 3 times in the theater, and every time, the real world around me melted, and I was lost in a earth put in peril by these invaders. But in a movie theater, I think it's easier to let your sense of reality fall away because of how much sensory deprivation is going on in there, especially in a pre-smartphone age. But Night of the Living Dead gave me that experience while I was sitting on my couch in my own home. I had everything I owned to distract myself with. I had everything in my comfortable reality to distract myself with. I could get up, walk away, I could pause it, and still, I was so drawn in that I was terrified that this, what I was seeing, what I was experiencing, was the first step of the end of the world. And there was no turning back. And you can dread the zombies all you want, because that is a terrifying thought. But the way that George Romero and his team chose to end that movie ruins you. You forget about the monster threat outside and suddenly remember that you've been living with the real threat for the entirety of your life. That people will always be the worst thing for humanity. They'll always be the best thing for humanity. But they'll also always be the worst thing for humanity. We want to make sense of the things that happen to us. And sometimes things don't make sense. And things aren't neat. And things don't work out. It gives me chills just thinking about it. So bookmark that as an important moment in my life. But smash cut, bam, 1978, 10 years later.
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all time, Dawn of the Dead.
Now, I would debate that Dawn of the Dead is possibly more well-known than Night of the Living Dead. I mean, it has the more popular remake, and I think the title alone and the idea of zombies in a mall have caught on in the pop culture zeitgeist. Now, I watched Night of the Living Dead over and over. Probably seen it over 30 times. But Dawn of the Dead I think I can actually count on both hands how many times I've watched from beginning to end. I like it. And I liked it back when I first saw it too. But there's something about it that didn't click with me in a way that made me think more past it being just a cool movie I saw. I get what it was trying to say, but there was a cheese to it that I guess I was never able to completely get around. Which is pretty ironic because in 1985, George Romero and team released
George A. Romero's Day of the Dead.
And I love Day of the Dead. If you had asked me when I was 16, 17 years old to list my top 5 favorite movies, they may have shifted every few months, but Day of the Dead would have been consistent. Every single time you asked me, Day of the Dead would have been on that favorites list. I don't think it's there anymore. I've seen a lot of movies since, and I've grown up a little bit since. But if you want to talk about having me make a list of movies that influenced me growing up the most, maybe that kind of top 5, I'm pretty sure Day of the Dead would still be on that list. That opening scene alone is one of the scariest things I remember seeing at that age. The zombies coming out of places, that alligator, the music. It all just works, man. It's so good. I still remember my DVD for Day of the Dead. It was this weird trifold package. It opened with a little Velcro piece behind a embossed cutout picture of Bub, one of the main zombies in that movie. And I liked that movie so much, I remember just pulling out the DVD just to look at the case and to open it and to look at the artwork. Something I don't take the time to appreciate anymore. The physical packaging of home video releases used to be something that was really important to me. I loved the aesthetic of a really nice one, and I think I would still appreciate it, but I just don't buy movies anymore. At least physically. Sometimes, but not that often. So that trilogy has been incredibly influential to generations of filmmakers. So it was interesting to have all 3 of them readily available to me at any point in my life. All 3 of them were made before I was born. And I remember junior high and high school, watching them over and over, loving them, and thinking, man, I love zombie movies, and these are probably the reason why. But I would love to see George Romero come back and do another one. And what do you know? In my formative years, 2007, I got to go see a George A. Romero zombie movie in the theater.
George A. Romero's Land of the Dead.
Zombies, man.
Now, say what you will about Land of the Dead, it's not the best movie, but it was important to me. I think it's the closest thing we got to a true return to form for George Romero, because unfortunately, he kept going. I feel like there wasn't enough time between the movies in order to still be commenting on something the way he did almost decade by decade with his original trilogy. And while there were ideas of growing corporate influence in America and mass consumerism and the culture of giant blockbusters in Hollywood, now I think Land of the Dead had plenty to say, but almost felt like, let's do one for the fans. But it was the first time that the fans got to see George Romero work with that much money. And for the sake of fun, the entire movie is littered with cameos and Easter eggs. But I don't think it hit on the same level for me that those original 3 did. But then 2 years after that, and 2 years after that, the man put out 2 more movies. Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead. Now, the Of the Dead name has become somewhat of a joke. I think starting around the time of Shaun of the Dead's popularization, you started to see more and more movies come out with the blank Of the Dead formula in their title. And it was unfortunate to see the guy who created that genre become just another notch in that tree. Diary of the Dead was a found footage zombie movie that could have been a good commentary on the rise of internet culture and people doing stuff like this. But instead of leaning into that completely, he seemed to try and find a way to make the found footage style more traditionally cinematic. And it took away from the realism, and it never really fell on either side of the fence, and just felt like a mess. And Survival of the Dead is so ridiculously forgettable that the only details I can remember from it are that it took place in Ireland. There's an Irish guy, or maybe it was just grassy. It's like a farm. I have no idea. But what's the use in faulting an artist for trying? He was a different person. He was older. It happens to everybody, is that they change and they express things differently. And I always felt that he had a movie in him somewhere that was still great, but felt so anchored to what gave him that career. And his last few films felt like giving the fans what they wanted and not giving himself what he wanted. But I'm not him. I'm not in his head. I don't know. Maybe it was what he wanted. But his work will be admired by me for the rest of my life. And I'll always remember him for the things he put out in the world. He was a true inspiration to me. I was lucky enough in 2007, 2008 to get to meet him. Now, it was a Comic-Con signing. It wasn't like an opportunity for me to have a long conversation with him or anything. But he left a lasting impression on me. Because I walk up to the booth and the woman working told me that in order to get his signature on anything, we had to purchase something from their booth and then had to pay for his signature. And I was young enough to be on board no matter what. And I remember taking the money, which was kind of a lot. It was around $50 for the picture and the autograph. And I handed it to him, and he refused to take the money in a very polite, nice way, and said, no, that's not for me, it's for them. I don't want to take your money for this. He said, I don't need money from this. He refused to take the money, and in fact kind of made fun of the people at the booth for requiring it at all. And I asked him if he was going to see any of the money for this, and he said no, he didn't want to. I've spent the last 2 days trying to find that picture I took with him, and I can't find it, which is really disappointing. But the memory of that story isn't going anywhere. Well, that was another fun one, guys. But I got one more thing I wanted to show you. I couldn't find the picture of him and I, but I have held on to this. George Romero,